Welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Dialogue, where we're here to foster conversations that innovate change. I'm back with my brother Michael Upshaw, founder and CEO of Above the Cloud Media and Marketing. So what's up, brother?
Hey,
welcome back.
Welcome back, man.
Yeah,
it's all
so
good.
it's super, good content, I think, of what we're talking about. And I want everybody to literally jump in the chat. We don't monitor the chat right away, but sometimes we do. And we want to be able to interact with you. Who knows, your comment may be the fuel for another show that we can talk about. So Make sure you're jumping in the chat. Make sure we know you're here. Like and subscribe. You've heard all that stuff before, but we want to make sure that you are getting this content. And that we're continuing to foster this dialogue. That's why it's called the Disruptive Dialogue, right? So we're disrupting systems, and we talked a lot about systems in the last time. We talked about the trauma of poverty, but there's systems that go behind that. And when I left off the last show, I talked about how we are oppressing ourselves more than the oppressors.
Yeah.
Now that's something that people don't like to hear. It's not something I like to hear.
Yeah.
But let's just be real. We don't need the oppressors to oppress us if we're tearing our own stuff up.
Right.
If we're killing each other.
Yeah.
If we are holding each other down. I hear this term too often, crabs in a barrel.
Yeah.
Like, everybody's crabs in the barrel. Someone trying to get out, pull them back down.
Yeah.
Why do we do that?
Well, first of all, here's the thing, my thought process, and maybe I'm just, not informed or not in touch with reality.
Well, you're not.
Here's the thought process that I have, right? We smart enough to know that there's a system that exists, right? To try to keep you from getting ahead. Crabs in the bucket.
Right.
So why would you continue to feed into that system? Like, to me, if I'm smart enough to know that somebody is trying to harm me, why would I do things that would give them an opportunity to do harm to me? Now, I realize not everybody, but I'll use this scenario. If you know that you're driving a vehicle and you don't have a driver's license, you're putting yourself in a situation that says you're gonna get pulled over and that's a reason.
Right.
Or you're driving with no insurance, right? And that's a reason. So now when you get pulled over, you don't have a driver's license or your driver's license suspended or you don't have insurance and you're saying, why are you pulling me over? Well, you don't have a strong argument because now they have a stick to beat you with.
Well, I can look at your argument and I can flip it. If this system didn't oppress me, I had the money to go off and do certain things that I need to do. Or why would I keep feeding myself into the system that continues to oppress and lock me up or do certain things? It's because I don't know any different and I'm trying to find that way. Or this is all I know. I was born into this. I'm a third generation gang member. My dad was a gang member, my grandpa was a gang member, now I'm a gang member. So a lot of times, whether it's an excuse or not, a lot of times people don't see a different way. And so the only way they see is, I gotta get mine. And anybody that gets in my way, you're gonna get yours.
Yeah, and to that point, I would argue that a lot of people don't want to see it a different way. Right? To your point, my grandfather was a gangbanger, my uncle, my cousin, my whatever. Yeah, just like this guy, his grandfather was a cop, his father was a cop, his son's a cop, and his son is gonna be a cop. So that's a mindset, right? Hey, we all gonna be in the family business. But at some point, somebody jumps out and say, I don't want to be a police officer. I actually want to do something else. At some point, somebody says, I don't want to be a gangbanger. I actually want to do something else.
But have you seen someone that said, I don't want to be a police officer, but still be a police officer and just go through the motions?
Yeah.
Right.
You see them every day.
But do you think the gangbangers do the same thing? Like, I'm just going through the motions because this is all I know.
I can say this. I can't speak specifically about gangbangers because I didn't grow up in gangs or around gangs. What I know about gangs is from people that I've met who were in them. But I can say that there are certain cliques and you decide to be a part of that clique. And there are people who are very intelligent, who are smart enough to know that, man, I could have went another way. I've seen people come from good households and they decided that they wanted to be a bad boy or had this persona, right? Because it was like, hey, this is hood, right? And so I think that when we look at it, going back to the point of oppressing ourselves, that's saying that I have the right information, right? Because first, once the information is presented to you, then what do you do with it, right?
But what if you don't know what to do with it?
You dig deeper, right?
But that's the thing. It's like, can we dig deeper? And if we dig deeper, what do we find? Do we find that I get the answer to this information, or do I find that I learn more about what the situation is already? So I'll give you an example. It's me and my ignorance, right?
Yeah.
I was supposed to go to the Navy August 18th, 1990, August 17th, 1990. I had a date to go to the Navy. Mm-hmm. I was ready to go, everything. Going in with rank, everything. All I had to do was graduate high school. I'm in school, and this is where the poverty of trauma, the trauma of poverty comes in. Teacher challenges me while I'm in high school. Now, I've already failed the first 2 years of high school, so my last 2 years, I'm making up a whole year of high school as well as some more, mm-hmm. right? And so I'm grinding. And I'm in this English class, and this teacher challenges me on something. And I challenge him back. He didn't like the way I challenged him back, and he kicked me out of his class. Mm-hmm. I missed my graduation by 5 credits. We'll go to summer school. While I'm in summer school, all I have to do is graduate. And I'm going to the Navy. So all I have to do is graduate. In that time, I'm thinking, you know what? I'm going to take a test. I'm going to get out of this with a D, a C, something. I'm going to graduate, though. Yeah. Get to the end of summer school, the teacher says, all right, if you've done all your workbook now, you'll get a good grade. If you didn't do any of your homework during summer, it's on you. I couldn't finish it. I tried to stay up 2 nights in a row, couldn't do it, failed. I missed my date to go to the Navy. Times got hard. Yeah. So as I'm digging deeper, like, God, I just got to make this work. I go to one of these little technical colleges for computerized accounting. I'm trying to figure it out. I don't even know how that works. I don't even know how I got in that. They just took my money. But then when times really got hard, I didn't know where I was going to sleep, how I'm going to eat. I started robbing people, places and things. Get caught one night for armed robbery. There goes my military dreams. Yeah. Right? What did I do? I picked up what I knew. Yeah. I tried the other way. It doesn't seem to work. Yeah, my bad decisions. But what led me to those bad decisions, right? So what I'm saying is, all that shaped the way I started thinking. Because I was like, man, if this system keeps oppressing me, not seeing my part in it. Right. This system keeps oppressing me, forget it. Anybody gets in my way, this is where I'm going.
Well, I think, and that's the cool thing. So we talked about in the last episode about having similar backgrounds, right? Right. So same scenario, different outcome, right? Joined the military, signed up for the Marine Corps, was still doing stuff, getting in trouble, right? A friend of mine ended up in prison. Fortunately, that wasn't my road, but I stayed just enough tethered to what I made a decision to do to stay out of trouble long enough to get out.
Did you stay out of trouble, or you just didn't get caught?
Well, at one point, I got to a place where I stayed out of trouble. And the reason why is because not recognizing it then, but recognizing it today, it was the grace of God. Because the one thing that I did that could have changed that, right? So much like you, I was kicked out of school, had to go to a whole nother school to graduate, right? I was kicked out of school for selling drugs. So that was my senior year. Right. So I had to basically do my senior year over, right? Went to another school. My buddy who I was just talking about decided to go to that school with me. 5 weeks before graduation, he decides to drop out. I decide I'm going to stay in school because at least I got to graduate because I know I'm going to the Marine Corps, right? But because I didn't get a drug charge when I got busted, and they really gave me a great opportunity. I didn't realize it then because, hard-headed, stupid, right? But they never took me to jail. But what they did do is they went to the school and told the school that I was selling drugs. So I avoided the office for a while, and finally I was hanging out by the office because I got comfortable. And that's when Dean Souls came and said, hey, I need to talk to you.
You need to talk.
And he kicked me out. And I thought I was gonna get back in. My dad came up to the school. He talked to the principal. They were like, he's expelled. Now, I mentioned in the previous episode that I had already got kicked out of all Detroit public schools, right, when I was in middle school. Now I'm in high school and I get kicked out of all archdiocese, right? And so now I'm going back into the public school system. So the same thing, right? We have decisions and choices that we have to make. The oppressor can create the environment, but then it's us that has to make a decision. I decided at that point that I wasn't going to do anything else to make me miss the opportunity. No matter how tough, no matter how hard, I only had a small window to go, right? If I could just make it in this small window, then I could do it. Here's the thing. Regardless of how yours went and how mine went, we both have knowledge today that has us sitting right here talking about it.
Right.
So that tells me that people, if you want it, when the information is presented to you at some point in time in your life, when you get tired of being oppressed by yourself, by the community, by people, outsiders, and you take responsibility for your own self and actions, at some point, man, you say, you know what, man, I'm not doing it. A buddy of mine, it's the last thing I'll say. When he got out of prison, he said this. And he had been to prison multiple times, but the last time he got out, he said, the state of Michigan has got everything that they got, and that's all they're gonna get from me. And what he said was, I'm tired, man. I've done this, and I've repeated this enough that I'm not giving them anything else because I'm worth more than that.
Yeah. One of the key things you said is owning your mess.
No,
one key, just one key, that's it. You don't have multiple keys. No,
he needs more coffee.
It was a lot of good things.
Give me some more
coffee so I know what I'm doing.
There you go.
But what you said about owning your stuff, like you made a decision. You owned it early on.
Yeah.
I made a decision. I owned it after it was too late.
Yeah.
Like every decision that I made up until that point was my decision.
Yeah.
So no matter how I got incarcerated and who did what or whatever happened, I know that it was all my decisions.
Yeah.
And if I'm gonna make this shift and the change, it has to be my decision.
Yeah.
And I have to be willing to accept whatever comes my way.
Yeah.
And it's not that I'm disrespecting the people that I grew up with or anything like that. You know, they made decisions.
Yeah.
I made decisions.
Yeah.
I haven't been perfect. They haven't been perfect. No one's perfect. But what we're trying to do is make a better way.
Right.
And so for me, as I shared in the first podcast, this is my passion and my purpose is people, because people are the most important part of this process.
Yeah.
If we can't help people overcome the oppression that they receive, then they're going to continue to oppress others, and this cycle is going to continue where prisons are going to be filled, cemeteries will be filled, families will continue to be torn apart. All these other things. So we have to do something to disrupt the cycles of incarceration, disrupt the cycles of death.
Yeah.
That's why we have this conversation. A lot of times when we think about oppression, I can see clearly the oppressive forces that were back in the 60s and 70s. And even when I grew up, you know, in the 80s and 90s, I could see oppressive forces.
Yeah.
And I know that they're still there now. From the time when I was younger, though, to the point where gangs became a regular thing,
Yeah.
I didn't see as much oppression, you know, from laterally as I see now.
Well, it's called orchestrated oppression,
Right.
right? We know, you mentioned coming through the 60s, you know, if we look at that era, right, you had the marches and you had the civil rights movement and all of these things. Somewhere along the way, we get to the 70s and you still got this movement. But then we get to the 80s and we start seeing, you know, crack come into the play and all these different things, right? So we talked about poverty and, you know, the trauma of poverty. Well, we see how today, even the impact of that has moved communities into spaces that you can tell the impact of what those drugs did, right? And so we recognize that there's real issues, systemic issues. But what I'm saying is that why recognize it if we're not smart enough to say, wait a minute, man, look, you got people talking about it, but at the same time, when you go into certain areas in certain communities that thrive off of the poverty thinking people, right? And people who don't want to come up to a certain level,
right.
the addicted, right? So we have to deal with those things, right? Because if you have people who are suffering from addictions and now you have predators who prey on those and you don't change that, then it's going to be difficult because follow the money, right? In that process. And so that's what I'm saying. For those of us who have either come out of situations where we never were involved in the streets or different things like that, but you can look and say, man, that dude made it out because he made a decision, right? He grew up in the same neighborhood, same conditions, right, and probably suffers from some trauma himself or herself. But at the end of the day, we have to start looking at those examples as opposed to some of the ones that we look at. Because a lot of our heroes, unfortunately, become celebrated by what they did wrong as opposed to what was done right. I'm talking about the people who just started off on the right track and stayed there. Right. And I think if you had a background that was bad, right, and you changed your life, congratulations, and go help somebody else, because I believe we can. But if you didn't have a background that was bad, don't be afraid to go help somebody else and show them that this doesn't have to be the way. Like, that doesn't have to be your story. That doesn't have to be your testimony. Like, you can literally impact people by telling them that I didn't sell drugs, but I didn't run the street, I didn't rob, I didn't do these things. But anyway.
You know, there's a couple things that you said, but we have to remember this, that just because we grew up same, you made your decision, I made my decision, we all have different stories.
Absolutely.
We have different traumas, things that impact us, things that influence us.
Yeah.
One of the things that always makes me feel, it's interesting to me, that when you ask people about movies who are in that lifestyle, the number one movie that they gravitate toward, Scarface.
Yeah.
You know, that Scarface was this kind of person. I want to be Scarface.
Yeah.
And, you know, Scarface was a drug using, you know, all kinds of things we can see that he was, and ends up murdered at the end.
Yeah.
Like, why is that an example to our community? You know, why is that an example for people to say, you know, I'm gonna lift Scarface up, or I'm gonna lift this movie up, this gangster movie, or whatever, right? And a lot of times the examples, the music, the images, the imagery, that kind of draws people more into it. Yeah. And then we can see how underhanded, you know, some of that lifestyle is. Because the reality is, if you're slipping, you might get got, right? Again, not a knock on the neighborhoods or anything, it's just pointing things out. But there has to be a better way, because we can't continue to oppress ourselves and we have oppression. We can't create oppression on top of oppression. We can't keep our killing the person that looks like us because we're mad at a system that doesn't recognize us. And
let me say this, it doesn't mean that we go and kill anybody. Right. Right. But we have to stop the killing, period.
But even in the stopping the killing, it is creating the opportunity.
No, I get it.
Right? We can't tell people to stop a system that they think is working. Yeah. If they don't see any alternatives. Yeah. And so a lot of times the easiest thing that we can see is keep things going the way it is, status quo. But can we change the plan? Yeah. That's the one thing. Can we change the plan that's been out there for us? Because as we start to look at being oppressed and then becoming the oppressors to the people that laterally are peers and our communities and everything else, can we make that change? Can we change the plan? And here's what I'd like to pose for our next show. And I want to hear from you all in the chat. Again, like and subscribe so you can catch this next show that comes up. What if gangs were the solutions to building our communities? What if the very oppressed and those people who connected together to help form this union to push us forward and hopefully propel us forward? You know, unfortunately, the way we're doing it is harming each other, but what if they were the ones that can provide the resources and the structure and the systems to make the change? So there's a way that we can look at gangs differently.
Can't wait for this next episode.
And this episode that's coming up, you know, we got to begin to think about it and rethink it. And it's not just the gangs, but it's people. If the gangs get behind it, then they have the leadership. They have the structures and the systems that can possibly make the changes, but they need to be equipped in a different way. And they have to really begin to look at the people that are rivals or enemies as business partners and people that they can do work together. This is not something that's going to happen overnight, but the way we see gang banging and everything that we see today, it didn't happen overnight either. So it has to start someplace. And so stay tuned to our next episode, and let's look at maybe how gangs can be the solution.